So, if I told you there was an environmental toxin in your home right now, like something that causes the exact same full body inflammatory response as chain smoking cigarettes or being exposed to asbestos, you would probably evacuate immediately.
Oh, yeah, you'd call a hazmat team, for sure.
Right. You would be out of there. But the crazy thing is, millions of people are living with that exact level of biological toxicity every single day. And as a society, we usually just dismiss it as, a sad feeling.
It is incredibly unsettling when you actually look at the biology,
Yeah.
because we are talking about chronic isolation and exclusion. And the research, notably from Steve Cole at UCLA, points out something that completely upends how we view human interaction.
Yeah, the early death fertilizer thing, right?
Exactly. Prolonged loneliness is essentially fertilizer for early death. It is that serious.
Okay, let's unpack this right out of the gate because we are not just talking about being picked last for dodgeball here. We are talking about a biological imperative
We really are.
because the brain processes social exclusion using the exact same neural pathways that it uses to process physical pain. I mean, if you break your leg or if you are completely ostracized by your peers, your brain is sounding the exact same alarm.
It is the exact same alarm. And that is really the foundation of what we are doing today. Welcome to a deep dive into the hidden, complex, and frankly, invisible science of belonging.
Yes, welcome.
Our mission today is to pull back the curtain on how targeted, almost microscopic psychological tweaks, what the researchers actually call situation crafting, can radically alter human potential, health, and society at large.
And we have an incredible stack of research for you, the learner, to go through today. We're drawing heavily from a fascinating lecture and decades of systematic analysis by Jeffrey L. Cohen.
He is a Stanford researcher and an absolute pioneer in organizational studies and psychology.
Yeah, his work is foundational. And we are also integrating a comprehensive 2018 funder briefing from the Mindset Scholars Network, which essentially synthesizes the insights from leading social scientists across the country.
And the reason we really have to start with that startling biological reality, the fact that exclusion is physically toxic, is because it sets the stakes.
It makes it real.
Exactly. Before we can even begin to understand how to bridge political divides or how to fix our schools or, I don't know, how to build better workplaces, we first have to understand what is physically and psychologically happening to a human being when their sense of belonging is threatened.
So let's start at the very beginning. How do these researchers, specifically Cohen, actually define belonging? Because, I mean, it feels like such a corporate buzzword right now. You see it on HR pamphlets all the time. Is there a harder scientific definition here?
There is, and Cohen defines it beautifully and deceptively simply. He says it means to go together.
To go together. I like that.
Right. We are, at our evolutionary core, a species meant to go through life together. Think about our ancient ancestors on the savannah.
Oh,
Being separated from the tribe didn't just mean you were feeling a little lonely on a Friday night. It meant you were going to be eaten by a predator or you were going to freeze to death in the winter. You simply could not survive alone.
so our biology evolved to make isolation physically painful so that we would literally be forced to seek out the group again. It's a survival mechanism, like pulling your hand off a hot stove.
Exactly. The pain of exclusion is a biological stop sign. But in the modern world, we aren't usually running from predators.
Thankfully.
Yeah, thankfully. The threats are invisible now. And this brings us to a core concept in Cohen's work, which is belonging uncertainty.
Let's dig into that because I think everyone listening to this has felt that at some point. You walk into a crowded party where you don't know anyone or you start a new job and you have that internal monologue of, do I fit in here? Did I wear the right thing? Are these my people?
Right, everyone experiences that baseline level of doubt. But what the social scientists point out is that for individuals from marginalized or stigmatized groups, this doubt isn't just a fleeting feeling that goes away once you learn your coworkers' names.
It sticks around.
It becomes a chronic state of being.
Because the environment is constantly, subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, sending them signals that maybe they don't belong.
Precisely. Claude Steele, a prominent social psychologist whose work is foundational here, uses an incredibly evocative metaphor for this. He calls it the snake in the house.
Ooh, I found this metaphor so visceral when reading through his work.
It really is. I mean, imagine someone tells you that a poisonous snake got loose in your house. Now, you might not see it. It might be hiding under the sofa or behind the refrigerator.
But you know it's there.
Right. You aren't actively being bitten, but what happens to your psychological state?
you are going to be hyper vigilant. I mean, every shadow in the hallway, every creak of the floorboards, every time a piece of clothing brushes against your ankle, your heart is going to race. You are entirely consumed by threat detection.
Exactly. Now apply that to a stigmatized individual. Let's say you are a student of color in a predominantly white institution, or a woman in a highly male-dominated STEM field.
Okay, I see where this is going.
A negative stereotype about your group, like the idea that people like you aren't as smart or don't belong in this field. That stereotype is the snake in the house.
Wow.
Even if no one in the room is overtly saying anything prejudiced to you, the mere awareness that this stereotype exists keeps you in a state of high alert.
You're constantly monitoring the environment. Like, did that professor just talk down to me because of my race? Was I left off that email chain because of my gender, or was it just a typo?
You are forced to act as a detective in your own life, trying to decode every single interaction. And that leads us to another massive piece of the puzzle, which is self-affirmation theory. Because when we are in that state of threat, human beings have a fundamental motive to maintain what researchers call global self-integrity.
Meaning we all desperately want to feel like we are morally and adaptively adequate. We want to look in the mirror and feel like we are, good people who are capable of handling the world.
Yes, absolutely.
Yep.
When that global self-integrity is threatened, say you fail a massive exam or you receive a really harsh critical performance review at work, our natural reflex-level psychological response is defensiveness.
Right.
We try to protect our ego.
Sure, that makes sense.
We rationalize the failure, or we disengage completely. We say things like, well, that test was totally unfair, or I don't even care about this stupid job anyway. We build a wall.
But the research reveals a fascinating loophole in human psychology here.
Yeah.
The self system is actually incredibly flexible. If you affirm your core values in an entirely unrelated area, it creates this sort of psychological buffer.
Yes. It uncouples your overall value as a human being from the immediate threat in front of you.
How does that work in practice?
Well, for example, let's say you are a student facing a massive academic threat that triggers that belonging uncertainty. If right before facing that threat, you spend just 10 minutes writing about something you deeply value, maybe your relationship with your family, your artistic abilities, or your religious faith, you are bolstering your global self-worth.
You are essentially reminding your brain, hey, even if I fail this math test, I am still a complex, whole person who is loved by my family and contributes to the world.
Exactly. And because your core identity feels safe, you don't need to throw up those defensive walls.
It lowers the temperature.
It does, which allows you to look at the failed test objectively and actually learn from the failure, rather than just shutting down.
Okay, this brings us to a concept that I think is the most important takeaway of this entire first section. It's what the researchers call the cognitive bandwidth tax.
Oh, this is so crucial.
When someone is experiencing chronic belonging uncertainty, when they are constantly looking for that snake in the house, they are burning up vital mental energy. Energy that should be used for complex problem solving or creativity or learning is instead being completely hijacked for threat detection.
And this is the real tragedy of it. This is why the achievement gap exists. People who are dealing with stereotype threat or belonging uncertainty do not underperform because of a lack of inherent ability or intelligence.
Right.
They underperform because their attention is literally split.
It's like trying to run a really high-end, graphically intense video game on your phone, but you don't realize there is a massive background app silently draining your battery and hogging all your RAM. The phone isn't broken.
No, not at all.
It has the processing power. It is fully capable of running the game. It's just distracted. The system resources are being diverted.
That is a perfect analogy. The hardware is fine. The operating environment is causing the lag.
But here's where I get frustrated reading this. If this is a biological fact, if this cognitive bandwidth tax is a measurable neurological reality that we can see in cortisol levels and brain scans, why do our institutions continue to treat belonging as a soft skill?
It's baffling.
Why is it viewed as this touchy-feely extra rather than a foundational requirement for human function?
That is the ultimate question. And it's what makes the transition from psychological theory to real-world practice so urgent.
Yeah.
Most of our institutions, our schools, our corporate structures, were built on a 19th century industrial model.
The assembly line mentality.
Exactly. They treat human beings as standardized inputs and outputs. They completely ignore the subjective psychological experience of the person inside the system. But when we actually apply this science, when we engage in what Cohen calls situation crafting, the results are absolutely staggering.
So we've established that this cognitive bandwidth tax is a neurological reality. It's draining the battery. But knowing this happens in a controlled Stanford lab doesn't help us out in the real world. We need to see what happens when you drop this bandwidth tax into the most chaotic, high-stakes environment imaginable, which is our educational system.
School is truly the ultimate test of cognitive bandwidth. And this is where we transition from the theory of belonging to the actual practice of wise interventions.
Let's get into it.
And there's no better place to start than the famous 7th grade sticky note study.
Yes. I love this study because it sounds almost absurdly simple, but the mechanics behind it are profound. Paint the scene for us. What was actually happening in this classroom?
So this was a classic randomized controlled trial that really put these concepts on the map. The researchers worked with 7th grade students of color. Now, remember what it is like to be a 7th grader,
Oh, I'd rather not.
right? You are 12 or 13 years old. Your identity is incredibly fragile. Your belonging uncertainty is probably at an all-time high, just purely based on adolescence, not to mention the added layer of racial stereotypes.
Right. You are a walking bundle of exposed nerves.
Exactly. So these students had just written a critical essay. The teachers took the essays, graded them, and provided their usual rigorous constructive criticism. Red ink everywhere. Corrections, suggestions for improvement.
A nightmare for a 12-year-old.
Yeah. Now, for a random half of the students, they just got the essay back as usual. But for the other half, the intervention group, the researchers had the teachers append a single generic sticky note to the front of the essay.
And the note simply said, I have the quote here, I'm giving you these comments because I have high standards and I know that you can meet them.
Just one sentence.
One sentence.
But think about the psychological heavy lifting that one sentence is doing. It conveys two things simultaneously: incredibly rigorous expectations and an unwavering belief in the student's potential to reach those expectations.
It completely removes the ambiguity, because if you are that 12-year-old kid and you get an essay back covered in red ink, your immediate internal narrative, the snake in the house, is whispering, the teacher is giving me all this red ink because they think I'm not smart enough. They think people like me can't write.
Yes, the student is actively trying to decode the feedback. Like, is this an attack on my identity, or is this genuine help?
And the sticky note definitively answers the question.
It does. It essentially says, you belong in the circle of merit. I am pushing you hard because I see your potential.
The data points here are what really blew my mind. For the students who got the standard feedback, just the red ink, only 17% chose to revise their essays. But for the students who received that single sticky note, the revision rate jumped to 71%.
A massive, immediate behavioral shift from 17 to 71, that the researchers didn't stop there. The true power of this intervention is seen in the longitudinal data.
Right, they followed them.
Years later, researchers tracked these exact same students. Of the students who received that sticky note in 7th grade, 70% of them eventually made it to college. In the control group, the ones who didn't get the note, it was only 40%.
Okay, hold on. I have to push back here because I'm struggling with the math on this. A sticky note takes 2 seconds to read. A college trajectory takes 4 years of advanced math, standardized tests, waking up early, avoiding trouble, and paying tuition.
That's true.
So how can a single sentence on a Tuesday in 7th grade bridge that massive structural gap? Are we oversimplifying systemic poverty and educational inequality here? It sounds like magic.
I am so glad you asked that, because it is crucial. We don't frame it as magic.
Yeah.
Jeffrey Cohen and his colleagues are incredibly clear on this. A brief psychological intervention is not a magic wand.
Right.
It does not teach you algebra. It does not fund a school. What it does is create a confluence of positive psychology and opportunity.
Meaning the structural opportunity actually has to be there for the psychology to matter?
Precisely. If the school is fundamentally broken, if the roof is leaking, if there are no advanced placement classes, if the teachers are entirely absent or abusive, a sticky note will not save a student. The opportunity structure must exist.
That makes total sense.
But what the sticky note does is act as a catalyst. It clears the cognitive bandwidth tax just enough for the student to grab hold of the opportunities that are available to them.
It unsticks the gears.
And it sets off a domino effect. The literature refers to this as recursive processes, or the cycle of adaptive potential. Think about how human interaction compounds over time, like interest in a bank account.
Walk me through that compounding interest. How does it play out week by week?
Okay, so the student gets the note, they feel affirmed, their threat level drops, so they decide to revise the essay. They hand the revised essay back in. Now, the teacher sees this student putting in extra effort. Consciously or unconsciously, the teacher decides, oh, this kid is really trying. So the teacher starts investing a little more time in them. They give them the benefit of the doubt.
Which leads to the student getting a slightly better grade.
Right. And that better grade boosts the student's confidence. Because they are more confident, they aren't afraid to raise their hand in class the next week. Because they participate more, they get placed in an advanced track the following semester.
Wow, it really does compound.
Because they are in the advanced track, they are surrounded by peers who are talking about college. It's a positive feedback loop that builds over years, but it was all sparked by a 15-minute intervention that changed how the student interpreted a single setback.
It literally changed the narrative in their head from, I don't belong here, to, I am being challenged because I have potential. And Cohen's research highlights another brilliant way to change that internal narrative, which is story sharing, or what they call difference education. This was a social belonging intervention developed by Greg Walton and Jeffrey Cohen.
Yes, and this approach is specifically targeted at academic transitions, entering high school or moving from high school to college.
Tough times.
These are notoriously difficult periods where belonging uncertainty naturally spikes for everyone. You are a small fish in a big pond again.
So what does difference education actually look like in practice?
It is incredibly simple, which is the beauty of it. Incoming freshmen are asked to read stories or watch videos of older senior students talking about their own struggles adjusting to the school.
But the key here is how those older students frame the struggle, right? They aren't just complaining, they are normalizing the adversity.
Exactly. An older student might say, when I first got to this campus, I bombed my first chemistry midterm. I felt so isolated. I looked around the lecture hall and thought everyone else was a genius and I was a total fraud.
Which is exactly what the freshman is feeling right now.
Exactly. But then the older student pivots and provides the roadmap. They say, but then I talked to some upperclassmen and realized everyone struggles at first. It's a hard school. I started going to office hours. I forced myself to join a study group. And eventually I figured out how to study here, and this place felt like home.
By sharing these stories, the institution is explicitly telling the incoming student that feeling like an outsider is entirely normal. It is not a permanent trait. It is a temporary state.
Completely short-circuits the panic response.
It stops the new student from internalizing a bad grade as concrete proof that people like me don't belong here.
And we see these psychological levers working across wildly different demographics and challenges. The research highlights a values affirmation exercise done in a college physics class. Now, college physics is a space traditionally dominated by men, where female students often face severe stereotype threats.
The snake in the house for a woman in a physics lecture is the pervasive cultural stereotype that men are naturally better at hard sciences.
Right, so researchers had the female students spend a few minutes writing about their core personal values at the beginning of the semester. That's it.
It's a few minutes.
Just affirming their global self-integrity. And that simple exercise significantly improved their grades, virtually erasing the gender gap in that specific course. It buffered them against the ambient threat of the environment.
And what's amazing is that we know this scales. This isn't just effective in tiny, controlled lab settings with 40 kids. The College Transition Collaborative, or CTC, ran a massive trial that really proves the viability of this science.
The CTC scale-up is a landmark moment in this field. They took these belonging interventions, the story sharing, the difference education, and they turned them into 30-minute online modules. And they rolled them out to over 40,000 incoming students across more than 20 different college campuses.
40,000 students, that is an unbelievable sample size. You can't fake the data with a pool that large.
You really can't. And the results held up beautifully. These brief online sessions reduced the gap in first-year full-time completion between marginalized students and their continuing generation non-minority peers by 40%.
A 40% reduction in the achievement gap from a half-hour online exercise before they even unpack their bags in the dorm.
It's astounding.
It really hammers home that belonging isn't a personality trait you either have or you don't. It is a perception that is constantly being shaped by the environment.
But this brings up a massive systemic challenge that we have to confront. A sticky note works beautifully on an individual level. A 30-minute online module is a great inoculation. But if the environment they are walking into is constantly sending toxic signals, a 15-minute intervention is just a Band-Aid on a bullet wound.
Yeah, you can't out-intervene a toxic culture.
We can't just rely on one wise teacher. We need to look at structural, whole system overhauls.
Yes, because as we said, the opportunity structure has to exist. So let's zoom out. The Mindset Scholars Network Funder briefing provides one of the most compelling looks at this on a macro scale with what they call the core dataset.
The core data set is staggering. We are looking at data from 625,000 students across California, over 500,000 kids.
And when researchers surveyed this massive population about their sense of belonging, asking them to agree or disagree with statements like, I feel safe in my school, or I feel like I am a part of this school, stark, undeniable disparities emerged immediately.
They found that Black students reported a significantly lower sense of belonging than their white or Asian peers, even when they were walking the exact same halls, taking the exact same classes in the exact same school.
Wow.
And Black female students reported the lowest belonging of all.
Which proves that the school is not a singular objective experience. The school is a completely different psychological environment depending on who you are.
Exactly.
But the data set also proved the incredible upside of focusing on this.
It did. It showed that when a student's self-reported sense of belonging increased from one year to the next, it directly, measurably correlated with better math and reading scores, better attendance records, and significantly fewer behavioral issues. It proves the biological and psychological mechanism at a statewide scale.
So the multi-million-dollar question for a school district becomes, how do you actually engineer that increase in belonging at a systemic level? Because you can't just mandate that kids feel like they belong. You have to build the architecture for it. And one of the most powerful examples we pulled from the research is the AAA, the African American Male Achievement Program in the Oakland Unified School District.
The AAM is a brilliant case study because it utilizes a structural framework called targeted universalism.
I loved reading about this concept. Can you explain what targeted universalism actually means in practice?
Sure, think of it this way. A universalist approach says, we want every student to graduate, and so we give every single student the exact same textbook and the exact same tutoring hours. It treats everyone identically.
Okay, so equal inputs.
Right. But targeted universalism says we have a universal goal. Every student graduates. But we recognize that different groups are starting from different places and facing very different systemic barriers. Therefore, we use targeted, specific strategies to get each group to that universal goal.
Because giving everyone the exact same support completely ignores the fact that a Black male student in Oakland is dealing with a totally different level of belonging uncertainty and a totally different set of societal stereotypes than a white female student.
Exactly. So what does the AAMA program actually look like? It is not an optional after-school club that meets once a week in the gym. It is embedded directly into the daily master schedule of the school.
It's part of the day.
Yes. It features elective courses that are taught exclusively by Black male instructors who are specifically trained in cultural competency and trauma-informed pedagogy.
So what is happening inside that classroom that makes it so effective?
The curriculum is culturally relevant. It centers the history, the literature, and the lived experiences of the students themselves. It isn't just teaching them dates and facts. It is giving them a narrative where they are the protagonists, not the sidelined observers.
I love that, the protagonist.
And it heavily emphasizes peer support networks. They call each other brothers. It is daily structural affirmation of their identity. It removes the snake from the house for at least 1 hour every single day.
And the results from Oakland show that it works. Suspensions go down, graduation rates go up. But Oakland isn't the only district seeing success with systemic overhauls. The sources heavily feature another massive structural intervention called the BAY-R model, which stands for Building Assets, Reducing Risks.
BAY-R is a fascinating approach because while AMA is targeted at a specific demographic, BAY-R targets a specific vulnerable transition period for the entire school, which is the 9th grade year.
The 9th grade transition is a notorious bottleneck. You go from being the oldest kids in middle school to the youngest in a massive high school. The academic rigor spikes, and so many students just fall off the track completely.
So the BAY-R model uses 8 interlocking strategies to basically catch kids before they fail. They group the 9th graders into cohorts, so you travel through your core classes with the same group of peers, which immediately builds a micro-community.
But the most crucial part to me is what they do with the teachers. They give these cohorts dedicated teacher teams, And the administration actually carves out paid, scheduled time during the week for those teachers to meet and talk about the students.
And they aren't just looking at spreadsheets of test scores. They are specifically trained to talk about the students as whole human beings.
Like what?
Like, hey, I noticed Sarah has been falling asleep in my math class.
Hmm?
Is she doing that in English? And the English teacher says, no, but I know her mom just took on a night shift, so she's watching her little brother.
They are using real-time qualitative data to understand the student's situation.
Exactly. And they couple this with something called iTime, which is a specific weekly curriculum designed purely to foster relationships, build empathy among the students, and create a climate for learning.
And the institutional impacts are undeniable. Independent studies showed that implementing the BIRR model reduced course failures for ninth graders from 42% down to 30%.
That's a huge drop.
It is. And the effects were wildly disproportionate for students of color and low-income students. St. Louis Park High School in Minnesota used the BEAT-R model to completely close their graduation gap between white students and students of color. Let me repeat that. They completely closed it.
But reading through all this incredible data from Oakland, from the BETA-R model, from the sticky note study, you start to realize something deeply frustrating.
Oh, I know exactly where you're going. If we know this works, if we have the peer-reviewed data, the massive sample sizes, the closed achievement gaps, why in the world aren't all teachers taught this in their credentialing programs?
Right.
Why isn't the psychology of belonging a mandatory foundational part of becoming an educator? Because right now, reading this, it sounds like we are trying to install a cutting-edge, empathy-based, highly complex operating system onto institutional hardware that was built in the 19th century. The system is actively resisting the upgrade.
That is a very accurate analogy. The system was designed for compliance, not psychological driving. The Mindset Scholars Network actually recognized this gap, and they interviewed stakeholders at various teacher preparation programs across the country to find out why this science isn't making it into the classroom.
And what did they find?
They found several massive systemic roadblocks.
Let's walk through those roadblocks. What is stopping a university from just teaching this tomorrow?
First, traditional universities have incredibly complex, rigid governance structures. If a professor wants to change a curriculum to include Jeffrey Cohen's research, they can't just decide to do it. They have to go through curriculum committees, deans, accreditation boards, and miles of bureaucratic red tape. It takes years to change a syllabus.
Plus, there's a deep culture of faculty autonomy, which leads to massive siloing. The psychology department knows all about belonging uncertainty, but they never talk to the education department, who are busy teaching lesson planning.
Right. And as one professor noted in the interviews, the actual textbooks they're forced to use don't have chapters titled Motivation or Belonging. A math education textbook teaches a future teacher how to explain fractions. It does absolutely nothing to teach that teacher how to manage the stereotype threat a female student might be feeling while trying to learn those fractions.
So because they aren't taught the science, the research points out that teachers often fall back on what they call lay theories of motivation.
Lay theories are essentially the cultural common sense we all absorb. Carrots and sticks, rewards and punishments.
Yeah.
These lay theories feel very efficient in the short term. If a student acts out, you punish them with detention. If they do well, you give them a sticker or a piece of candy.
It's pure behaviorism, trading them like pets.
Exactly. But the psychological research definitively shows that these extrinsic motivators actually undermine deep, long-term learning. They don't build trust, they don't foster intrinsic curiosity, and they certainly don't build a sense of belonging. In fact, punitive discipline destroys belonging instantly.
And beyond discipline, just the act of giving constructive feedback is really hard. Teachers struggle to give feedback that actually supports a growth mindset. It is so much easier and requires so much less cognitive load to just say, good job, or mark an essay with a giant red X, than it is to sit down and engage in the wise feedback we saw in the sticky note study.
Because wise feedback requires a level of psychological attunement that we currently don't provide clear rubrics for in teacher training. We tell teachers, build relationships, but we don't give them the scientific tools to do it across racial or cultural divides.
And this brings up another deeply sensitive, highly debated issue in the field of teacher training, which is how do we confront teacher bias?
Right, because if belonging is universally good, why do some educators and researchers push back against directly confronting bias to achieve it?
That's a great question.
There's a fascinating tension in the field right now between stealth approaches and direct approaches. Many of Jeffrey Cohen's most successful psychological interventions are stealthy. Think about the values affirmation writing exercise. The students doing that exercise have no idea they are in a psychological intervention designed to reduce the racial achievement gap.
Because if they knew, it would trigger their defensiveness. If you tell a kid, we are doing this exercise because you are a minority and we want to prevent you from failing, you have just reintroduced the snake into the house. You ruin the effect.
Exactly. The stealth is necessary for the student. But some experts argue that when it comes to training the teachers and the administrators, being stealthy is paternalistic and ultimately insufficient. They argue that you cannot build truly equitable, belonging-rich environments unless you directly, explicitly confront the biases that teachers hold.
Especially given the demographic reality that the teaching force in the United States is still predominantly white, while the student body is increasingly diverse. You can't just stealth your way out of systemic racial bias.
Right. Changing an individual teacher's mindset is vital. But if that newly enlightened teacher is operating within a school building that has deeply inequitable tracking policies or punitive zero-tolerance discipline systems that disproportionately target Black and brown students, the systemic issues will overpower the individual teacher's good intentions every time.
We have to address both the individual psychology of the educator and the institutional policy of the district.
Exactly.
And here's the thing. These students we've been talking about, they eventually graduate. The crisis of belonging doesn't magically end when they hand you a high school diploma or a college degree. This biological need and the bandwidth tax of exclusion follows you into the real world. So let's pivot and look at how these exact same psychological levers operate in our jobs, our hospitals, and our justice system.
The transition from the classroom to the boardroom shows us that the fundamental human need for belonging remained absolutely constant, even if the context changes from grades to salaries. In the workplace, one of the most prominent and frankly heartbreaking issues Cohen's research addresses is called the mentor's dilemma.
This section of the research blew my mind because it is so incredibly common and yet nobody talks about it. Let's role-play this a bit to explain it. Think about a manager who needs to give a performance review.
Okay, so the mentor's dilemma occurs when a manager needs to give rigorous, highly critical feedback to an employee, but there is a social, gender, or racial divide between them. Let's say a white male manager is reviewing a young Black female employee. The manager knows her work needs improvement, but the manager is terrified of appearing biased or racist or overly harsh.
He is experiencing his own form of threat. He wants to protect his self-image as a good, progressive, unbiased manager.
Exactly. So what does he do to protect himself? He softens the feedback, he pulls his punches, he gives vague praise instead of actionable critique.
And by trying to protect himself, he actively harms the employee. Because that young woman is now being completely deprived of the rigorous, honest feedback she actually needs to grow, improve her skills, and advance in the company. Her professional growth is stunted by her manager's fear.
It's a tragedy of good intentions. The manager thinks they are being nice, but they are actually engaging in a form of professional neglect. So what's the solution? How do we fix the mentor's dilemma in corporate America?
We return to the exact same psychological mechanism as the 7th grade sticky note, which is wise feedback.
Yes. The manager must explicitly state their high standards and then immediately follow it with a clear, unambiguous assurance that they believe the employee has the capacity to meet those standards. By doing this verbally, the manager uncouples the criticism from any potential perception of racial or gender bias.
They are saying, look, this report isn't up to par. Our standards here are incredibly high, but I am pushing you to rewrite this because I have seen your potential and I know you can hit this mark. It removes the ambiguity.
It signals to the employee that they belong in the circle of merit. They're worth the effort of critique.
Now, if you are listening to this and you've ever hired someone, you probably think you are immune to this. You think you hired the absolute best person on paper. You think your gut is objective. But Cohen's research is about to make you deeply uncomfortable about your last hire because he identifies something called the objectivity illusion.
This is one of the most powerful and insidious cognitive biases human beings possess. The objectivity illusion is our deep-seated, unshakable belief that we see the world perfectly clearly exactly as it is without any bias whatsoever. Because our perception feels objective to us, we assume our decisions are purely rational.
But because we are totally blind to our own biases, we end up doing these mental gymnastics. We unconsciously redefine merit on the fly to justify hiring people who look, act, and think exactly like us.
Let me give you the classic example from the literature. Imagine a hiring committee is looking at 2 finalists for a job. Candidate A has a prestigious Ivy League degree, but very little actual field experience. Candidate B went to a lesser-known state school, but has 5 years of gritty, hands-on experience in the industry.
Okay, classic mashup. Pedigree versus experience.
Now, if candidate A, the Ivy Leaguer, happens to be socially similar to the hiring manager, maybe they share the same race, or they both played lacrosse, or they just have a similar vibe, the manager will unconsciously decide that educational pedigree is clearly the most important factor for this specific role. They will argue passionately for candidate A based on their rigorous academic background.
But wait, what if it's the other way around?
If candidate B, the state school grad, is the one who is socially similar to the manager, that exact same manager will suddenly decide that real-world, hands-on experience is the only thing that truly matters and that Ivy League kids are too theoretical.
They completely redefine the criteria of the job after the fact to justify the gut feeling they had when the person walked in the room.
Yes. They aren't trying to be malicious. The objectivity illusion allows them to genuinely believe they are making a purely merit-based decision, while in reality, they're just reverse engineering a justification to hire someone from their own tribe.
So if we are all victims of this objectivity illusion, how can any manager or doctor or judge trust their own gut instincts? Are our guts fundamentally broken?
Our guts aren't broken, but they are deeply influenced by the social soup we swim in. They're relying on heuristics and mental shortcuts that are shaped by centuries of societal stereotypes. The fix here isn't to just hold a seminar and tell managers to try harder to be unbiased. Willpower doesn't work against unconscious bias. The fix is, once again, situation crafting.
You have to change the choice architecture. You have to remove the flexibility that allows the bias to creep in.
Exactly. In hiring, that means pre-committing to your criteria before you ever look at a single resume or conduct a single interview. You decide as a committee beforehand, for this role, hands-on experience is weighted at 70% and educational pedigree is weighted at 30%. You write it down. You lock it in.
That forces your hand.
By crafting the situation beforehand, you tie your own hands, preventing you from shifting the goalposts later to favor someone who makes you feel comfortable.
That makes perfect structural sense. You have to outsmart your own brain. And we see these exact same psychological principles shaping life or death outcomes in healthcare. When we talk about medical outcomes, we usually think about the efficacy of medication or the skill of the surgeon. But the research highlights the immense biological power of human connection in medicine.
The Funda briefing details a remarkable study involving medical providers treating homeless patients. Homeless individuals often have massive distrusts of medical institutions, and for good reason. They are frequently treated as burdens or invisible.
Talk about extreme belonging uncertainty.
Exactly. So in this study, doctors and nurses were instructed to take just a few extra minutes during the intake process to take a personal interest in the patients. They asked about their hobbies, their personal histories, what kind of music they liked. They intentionally treated them as whole, complex human beings rather than just a set of symptoms to be processed.
And the results. Obviously, the patients reported significantly higher satisfaction. They felt seen. But the impact wasn't just warm and fuzzy. From a hard institutional perspective, those patients actually required fewer costly follow-up treatments.
Because the providers, through that brief human connection, established that the patient belonged in the circle of care. When a patient feels they belong, their biological stress levels drop. Cortisol decreases. But behaviorally, they're also far more likely to actually adhere to the treatment protocols, take their medication, and trust the medical advice they are given.
Institutional trust. It all comes back to that. If you do not trust the institution, whether it's a hospital, a company, or a school, you will not engage with it productively. And there is perhaps no institution where this trust dynamic is more critical and more fractured than the justice system.
Cohen's research looked at this through the lens of parole officers. The traditional dynamic between a parole officer and a parolee is purely punitive. It is a relationship based entirely on surveillance, authority, and the constant threat of returning the person to prison. It is the ultimate carrot-and-stick environment.
Which, as we learned earlier, destroys belonging and intrinsic motivation.
Right. So researchers introduced a remarkably brief intervention. They gave parole officers a 1-hour training module focused entirely on how to build trust and connection with their parolees.
Just 1 hour of training on how to foster a relationship based on mutual respect and shared goals, rather than pure authoritative surveillance.
And that single 1-hour module measurably, significantly reduced recidivism rates among the parolees those officers supervised. Think about the societal cost savings, not to mention the human lives saved from just changing the psychological dynamic of that relationship.
The fundamental through line across all these domains, whether you are an employee hoping for a promotion, a homeless patient in an ER, or a parolee trying to rebuild your life, is that institutional trust is an absolute prerequisite for prosocial behavior. If the environment signals to you that you do not belong to the circle of care or the circle of merit, your biological and psychological response will be to disengage, put up walls, and prepare for a threat.
Which perfectly bridges us to the final and perhaps most daunting arena we are covering today.
Yeah.
Because this objectivity illusion we talked about in hiring, this biological need to protect our tribe, it doesn't just dictate who gets the job or who goes back to jail. It completely distorts our shared social reality, leading to the ultimate breakdown in belonging, which is our current state of political polarization.
Okay, before we dive into this final section, I need to pause and make a mandatory disclaimer to you, the listener. We are about to talk about political parties, Democrats and Republicans, but I want to be crystal clear, we are absolutely not taking a political side here.
No, not at all.
Our mission today is to impartially report the scientific findings from Jeffrey Cohen's research and the psychological data on human behavior. We are looking purely at the mechanisms of belief, the psychology of how our brains process political information. We are not endorsing any specific policies or viewpoints.
And understanding those mechanisms is vital, because they are deeply rooted in the tribalism and belonging we've been discussing for the past hour. Cohen conducted a fascinating, slightly terrifying study in 2003 titled Party Over Policy. He wanted to answer a fundamental question. What actually drives our political views? Is it the objective facts and details of a policy, or is it our social group identity?
We all want to believe it's the facts. We all want to believe we are rational actors. But the results of this study are staggering. Paint the picture of what Cohen did here.
He took a very generous, liberal welfare policy, one that provided extensive benefits. He presented this exact same policy to both self-identified Democrats and Republicans, but he manipulated the label on the proposal.
He used the objectivity illusion against them.
Exactly. When Republicans were told that this generous, liberal welfare policy was endorsed by the Republican Party leadership, they overwhelmingly supported it. They read the details and thought it was a great idea. And conversely, when Democrats were presented with a highly restrictive, stringent welfare policy, one they would normally hate but were told it was a Democratic initiative, they supported it.
They completely flipped their supposed ideological values based entirely on the party label. The actual text of the policy didn't matter at all. The brand name was everything. And the wildest part to me is what happened when Cohen interviewed them afterward. When he asked them why they supported the policy, what did they say?
They pointed to the details of the policy. They genuinely believed they were making an objective, rational choice based on the merits of the welfare program itself. They completely denied that the party label influenced them. They were totally blind to the fact that their social identity was doing 100% of the driving.
That is the objectivity illusion operating at a terrifying scale. We think we are debating facts, but we are actually just defending our team colors.
Because in a polarized world, our political party isn't just a voting bloc. It is our tribe. It provides our sense of belonging, our community, our friends. If you agree with the other side on a specific issue, even if the facts warrant it, you trigger belonging uncertainty within your own tribe.
If I agree with this policy, will my friends think I'm a traitor? Will my family disown me?
Exactly. The threat of tribal exclusion is so biologically terrifying that it literally forces the brain to become closed-minded to protect its social safety. When forced to choose between objective facts and social belonging, the human brain will choose belonging every single time.
Okay, so that is profoundly depressing. What does this all mean for the listener who is sitting at a tense family dinner trying to talk to an uncle who completely disagrees with them? Are we just doomed to yell at each other forever? Thankfully, Cohen's book, Belonging, offers some actual practical strategies for connection to break this cycle.
Yes, there are ways to hack this dynamic. The first strategy is subjective opinion framing. When we argue politics, we almost always state our opinions as objective, undeniable facts. We say, the economy is doing terrible, or this policy is a disaster.
And when you state things as absolute facts, the other person's brain immediately interprets it as an attack on their reality. It triggers that self-integrity threat we talked about in the very beginning. They get defensive.
But if you frame it subjectively, if you say, I think, or in my experience, or from what I've seen in my community, it immediately lowers the temperature in the room. You aren't attacking their absolute reality. You were just sharing your own personal perspective. It makes opponents significantly less defensive and more willing to engage.
The second strategy is a subtle but massive shift in how we approach empathy. It's the difference between perspective taking and perspective getting. Now, we are often told that to bridge a divide, we need to put ourselves in the other person's shoes. We need to imagine their perspective.
But the psychological research shows that guessing what another person is thinking usually fails miserably.
Perspective taking is like trying to navigate a new city using a map drawn by someone who has never actually been there. You're just guessing based on your own stereotypes of what that person must think.
That's exactly it. You are projecting your assumptions onto them. Perspective getting, on the other hand, is simply asking a local for directions. You directly ask the person, can you explain to me why you feel this way? How did you come to this conclusion? And then, and this is the crucial part, you actually sit back and truly listen to the answer without interrupting or preparing your counterargument.
You validate their humanity. You signal that even if you wildly disagree on the policy, they still belong in the conversation. And the final strategy brings us full circle, all the way back to the seventh grade classroom, which is political values affirmation.
Just like the students who accepted harsh feedback on their essays after affirming their core values, citizens are much less likely to reject threatening political facts if they first reflect on their personal values.
If you ask someone to talk about how much they love their children or how much they value honesty or hard work, you bolster their global self-integrity. You make them feel like a fundamentally good person.
And once their ego feels safe and affirmed, they don't need to aggressively defend their political tribe to feel like a worthy person. The defensive wall comes down. They become open to listening to information that contradicts their worldview because their self-worth is no longer tied exclusively to being right about politics.
It is incredible how these exact same microscopic levers, these little tweaks in how we communicate, operate identically in a seventh grade classroom, a corporate boardroom, and at a geopolitical level. It all comes down to situation crafting.
To summarize this entire deep dive, belonging is not a soft, touchy-feely extra. It is a biological imperative, as real and as urgent as the need for food, water, or shelter. Our brains process exclusion as physical pain. But the optimistic, deeply empowering takeaway from all of this research is that we are not entirely at the mercy of the system. Through situation crafting, we can make small, wise adjustments that unlock massive human potential.
And that is the ultimate takeaway for you, the learner. Whether you are leading a corporate team, teaching a class, raising a child, or just talking to a neighbor over the fence, I want you to remember the control groups in all these massive studies. Think about the seventh graders who didn't get the sticky note. Think about the employees who didn't get the wise feedback from their manager. Those control groups represent a tragedy of missed opportunities.
Millions of people whose potential remains locked away because the environment is draining their cognitive bandwidth.
But it doesn't have to be that way. You have the agency to change the psychological weather in your daily interactions. You have the power to craft the situation.
You can remove the snake from the house for the people around you.
Which brings us to our final thought. Deep in the sources, there is mention of a concept called the fundamental attribution error. It is our deeply ingrained, almost automatic tendency to blame a person's inherent character for their bad behavior while completely ignoring the situational forces acting upon them. We see a student failing, or a coworker disengaging, or a family member yelling about politics, and we immediately say they are just a bad person. They are lazy, they are toxic. We blame their character rather than asking what environment is creating this behavior. So, I want to leave you with this to mull over. Think of the most difficult, stubborn, or disengaged person in your life right now, the one who frustrates you the absolute most. What if they aren't inherently broken or toxic? What if you are simply witnessing their brain's biological desperate reaction to a situation that constantly threatens their sense of belonging? And more importantly, what if you have the power to craft a different situation for them tomorrow?